Thank you very much, Micah. And do keep Genesis 32 open. One of the experiences of going through this series in Jacob I found is that I've seen many more things than has been able to be said in one sermon, and I think I feel that acutely this week. There is much here. There's always more things to say than can be said. We're looking at some things this morning, not everything, and I hope it'll help us, as I believe God will do with it. Let's ask God's help and ask that he would speak. Father, we pray you'd show us yourself this morning so that we will glory in you and not in ourselves. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Christmas time is often a family time. And family time may or may not conjure up for you a positive experience. It may be a bit of a mixed experience. For many it's a family time, and that is a positive thing. Because families speak of harmonious relationships and of time together and of nice meals and warm fires and so on and so on. The adverts for food from supermarkets have this sort of impenetrable bubble of harmony as they sit round a heaving table of many goodies. I remember a song in the church some years ago called Driving Home for Christmas, where it had that line, and it spoke of an amazing picture of family unity and delight and joy. For many, of course, to think of Christmas as family has no such positive connotation. It is rather wholly negative, because you think, as you perhaps re-meet relatives, of the discussion that you had last time you met and the apprehension there is and the unspoken tension and that subject in family life which you really mustn't go to because it'll just blow up in your face. And it's never been a positive picture at all. And the whole prospect of family life is a very mixed one. And Jacob, whose life we've been following, has this family event coming where he's going to reunite with all those that he's left and hasn't seen for 20 years. And it is a mixed feeling for him. In one sense, he's going back home. That should be a good thing. In another sense, there's this dark cloud hanging over him. It's the cloud of his brother. You may remember that Jacob cheated Esau out of the family birthright, and he's now returning to the cloud of death threats, really, from Esau for what he's done. And in that sense, chapter 32 is a chapter of preparation for Jacob. He's preparing for this meeting with Esau. And what he doesn't know, which is really the second half of the chapter, is that God also has some preparing to do. What we're going to do this morning is just pick out two snapshots. One is a snapshot of how you and I, mankind in general, how we work in the world. And we'll see how Jacob does to learn that. The other is a snapshot of how God works in people's lives. We've seen that all the way through in a sense, but this chapter is a bit of a focus of those things. First, the snapshot of how you and I work. The heading I've given it is this: we constantly strive to get a life of blessing. Humanity in general, even Christian people, we constantly strive to get the life of blessing that we think will do it for us, that will deliver. Jacob has learned a few things while he's been away. He's been away for 20 years, remember. He's learnt that God has been with him. That's a good thing. He's learnt God has given him a great deal. He's learnt that God is wholly reliable and dependable. But that doesn't mean he's the finished article. He's still got a lot more to learn. And there are lingering traits here of Jacob's striving for things. It's a bit like the smell of onions on your hands when you've been chopping them, or smoke on your clothes. You try and clean it, but it's just still there. And Jacob's whole life has been one of striving. We put it rather less politely earlier in the term. Jacob is the grabber, the one who seizes hold of things. He's always grabbing and battling with people to get what he wants. He's wrestled with his father, if you like, to get the blessing. He's grabbed from Esau, and he's battled with Laban over a long time, all to get what he wants, this blessed life that he thinks is going to deliver. He knows what he's wanted, and he's gone ahead and tried to get it. Now, just that spirit attitude in itself is much like the spirit of today. I was speaking to someone yesterday, talked about his time working for Credit Suisse in the city. He said he was working 18 hours a day. It was a good day if he got home by 1. All because the mentality in the bank was grab, achieve, get what you can, do what it takes to get where you want to be. It's the attitude of The Apprentice, if you ever watch that on television. A whole lot of contestants striving. I'll prove myself. I will succeed. I'll do anything to get where I need to be. So said one apprentice candidate who's now been voted off. That's where it gets you sometimes. Now, I imagine Jacob still may have a bit of a guilty conscience with his brother. And so what he's doing in this chapter is really making plans to deal with Esau's anger as he expects it to be. And he dispatches some messengers. He says, look, go up to Esau, find out what's going on, try and butter him up. They return and they say, well, Esau is coming, and by the way, he's got 400 men with him. Understandably, Jacob takes that as a bad sign, and he makes careful arrangements with all the stuff he's got in order to protect himself. And he splits everything into 2 groups. Because, verse 8, if you just have a look at top of page 36, let's get into the passage. Everyone's got verse 8. He split everything in 2 because he thought if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. And then a little later on, he gets gifts together for Esau, not just a bottle and some chocolates, about 550 odd animals as it happens. And the instructions, if you look down that page to verse 20, he instructs his servants, be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For Jacob thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I'm sending on ahead. Later when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So throughout this first half, Jacob is beavering away. He's trying to secure his livelihood and his welfare. He's got to make amends with Esau somehow. Because this relationship with Esau, it's a bit like a fly in the ointment of his life otherwise. There's so much he could enjoy, but there's this one relationship that's the niggle. I was once staying with a family, and I arrived rather late at night. They'd kindly left out the most delicious-looking plate of home-cooked food. And as I came to eat it, I noticed there's a little fly on it, and even worse, some eggs from the fly sitting on it. A whole lot couldn't be eaten. Real shame. Lovely, great big thing, but one little thing just gets in the way. I think it's a bit like that for Jacob. There's so much that he could enjoy. He's sitting on some amazing promises from God, a great family, a great nation, great blessing. Hasn't quite got it all, but there's this irritating little niggle, the matter of a very angry brother. One thing he's learnt finally is to pray. Jacob's first recorded prayer comes in this chapter, verse 9, if you look at it. It's a great prayer. Considering how little he's relied on God in recent years, it's a brilliant prayer. If you need a refresher for your prayers, you could do worse than look at this. He starts by praying according to what God has promised him. That's verse 9, and he finishes that way too in verse 12. He acknowledges in verse 10, I don't know how often you say this sort of thing in your prayers, his total unworthiness. Very unlike Jacob. And I like almost the middle bit best. He's wonderfully direct and honest. Verse 11, save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid he'll come and attack me. Save me, because here's the honesty, I'm terrified, Lord. It's good to know, isn't it? God isn't thrown by honesty. He can take exactly how we're feeling. He can cope with us telling him how we are. Good practice to spell out your fears to God as you pray. And so Jacob is working away by whatever means, arranging all his stuff, praying away, striving to get what he thinks is going to be the life of blessing, to deal with his brother, to get a life of great blessing that God has promised. It's a life of delightful people, as he hopes, his family, living in an amazingly special place, the land, and enjoying bountiful blessing. It's almost a heavenly existence, you might say. And it's the sort of existence people today also want, the sort of existence that you and I want. We want the right family. We want prosperity. We want life to be good. We want it to be satisfying. And we don't want any niggles. We don't want relationships to throw things. We don't want any problems that will gnaw away at us. Christian or not, we desire what the Bible describes as heaven. That's what we want. The question for Jacob is, how is that going to come? And at the moment his answer is still, I will do all that I can to secure it. I will strive yet more to get the life of blessing. Now, in a sense, the action could carry straight on to the beginning of chapter 33. Jacob's just sent the farmyard gifts, Amazon's special delivery, to Esau, and he then spends the night in the camp where he's arrived. Nothing else needs to happen except that the morning comes and the two brothers meet. But, strangely, we get this verse 22 to the end of the chapter. Jacob gets up in the middle of the night, and he takes his wives and his children, and he crosses the Jabbok River. And then he sends his possessions across the river as well, until it's just him on his own. He's alone. The Jabbok River runs along the border of the promised land. So if you like, Jacob is not quite there yet. He's not quite in the land. He's all alone, which is exactly as he was as he came out of the land on the way to his uncle Laban. And just like when he left the land, God meets him. His time away is bracketed by a meeting with God and a meeting with God. Because it seems before he can go back to the land, God has some preparing of Jacob to do. And this snapshot really is of how God works with individuals like Jacob. God graciously breaks people in order to give them the blessing. There's the world. We strive as hard as we possibly can in order to get the blessing that we think will do it. And God graciously has another plan, which is to break people so that he can give them the blessing. I don't know what your nerves are like. I hate it when people jump out at me, so don't do it after coffee. And when children get hold of how much you hate it, they just do it all the more, as you may know. It only encourages them. But verse 24 is a bit like that. It's as startling as, well, it's just a bit odd and random. Verse 24, so Jacob was left all alone, and surely he'll bed down for the night. But weirdly, a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Is he a robber or a mugger? Where's he come from? And the man wrestles with Jacob all night. Now, in one sense, that's right up Jacob's street. That's just his thing. He is Mr. Wrestler. He's been doing it with people in relationships, striving and battling and fighting. He's done it with plans and schemes. But now he's actually doing it physically in the dust of the ground around him. And Jacob's obviously pretty good. Perhaps he's even getting the upper hand because it does last so long, right until daybreak. Jacob's no weakling, remember. His chat-up move, remember, for Rachel was to move this huge stone over a well on his own, when normally you'd have to use a few people. And so verse 25, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. I don't know what you think of when you think of wrestling. I think of Big Daddy or Giant Hiscocks, someone like that. I had a friend who was really into wrestling, sort of serious, the sort of modern wrestling, WWF, World Wrestling Federation, or as it's now and more accurately known, World Wrestling Entertainment, it's now called. And you can look up some of the best known wrestlers on the WWE kind of website or whatever it is, and it gives you the kind of vital statistics of various wrestlers. Take, for example, Brock Lesnar, that's his name, and it looks like his belt's a bit tight, I think, but there's a little synopsis for Brock Lesnar. It says this: think all men are created equal, then how do you explain Brock Lesnar? And you get a list of information about him as a wrestler. You get his height and you get his weight. You You get a place of origin, and there's also a category where it says signature move. In other words, what's their favorite kind of move in the wrestling ring? For this fella, it's the F5. Oh yes, the F5. Whatever that is. You can read Genesis 32 and think that there's a man here whose signature move is the touch. Because it looks like that's all he's done, and suddenly the fight is over. This is not just some clever signature move. This is not a powerful winning lock that the man executes on Jacob. The word just means touch. The touch of a finger. The light touch of a finger. So there are two men. They're wrestling all night. And then it's clear that the man is not an ordinary man, because one touch and the fight is over. A whole hip is dislocated. I'm forever impressed by those of you who've had surgery or treatment on your hips and the way you carry on so amazingly through considerable pain. This touch puts a hip out of joint. And I know as you read verse 26, it looks like the wrestling match is still on, but when you've got a dislocated hip, you've had it. Jacob is broken. And the wrestling match here, if you like, is the culmination of what God has been doing to Jacob over the last 20 years. He's been working to break Jacob. God's been teaching Jacob that, no, Jacob, you're not in charge. I am in charge. For the last 20 years, Jacob has been Mr. Successful Striver, the go-getter, the grabber for himself. But now, God is not going to let him enter the land as this independent, strong man. God will only bless Jacob with the land once he is weakened and broken. And so God graciously breaks him. Verse 26, the fight really is over. It's not, I mean, look at it. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. It is not that Jacob has somehow jumped back into action and got him in a headlock, surprisingly. No, the let me go, you've got to think of a small child clinging onto the leg of a parent, and the parent saying, no, come on, let me go now. There's a sense in which Jacob's striving hasn't left him, because he's now striving. Do you see his question, his statement, verse 26, is for the blessing. It's for the right thing. But how he's going to get that blessing is very different. It's not by him striving, him fighting. Because he's been broken, Jacob now has to plead for it, ask for it, beg for it. The prophet Hosea, later in the Bible, he refers to this wrestling of Jacob and describes how Jacob wept and begged for God's favor. He still wants the blessing, but the striving is gone. He now begs for God's grace. God has broken him so that he'll then receive the blessing in the right way. I heard an illustration this week which may help. I hope it does. Imagine a little boy, say a 3-year-old, and at that age, 3-year-old boys, they want to do things by themselves. This 3-year-old boy, he's got hold of a packet of biscuits. And he really wants a biscuit. He wants to open the packet of biscuits. He finds it difficult. It's a bit too tricky. The boy gets a bit frustrated. And it's no good at that point the dad offering help to the boy, because the boy only gets more independent-minded and he just holds on to the biscuits more firmly. And if the dad were to reach out to try and help the boy with the biscuits, the boy will only hold on even more firmly. Now, if you're the dad in that situation, what are you to do? How are you to help the struggling 3-year-old? Especially if, as the dad, they're your biscuits. Especially if the dad, you bought the biscuits, and the reason you bought the biscuits was to give them to the boy. What are you to do? The only option for the dad is to make the 3-year-old accept your help. And so you wrestle him. Probably doesn't go through the night, but it might involve tears. And suddenly the boy is losing control. Dad gets hands on the packet of biscuits. The son doesn't like that at all because he has lost control. Finally, the dad has the biscuits. He's got total control. He opens the biscuits, helps himself. He's won the wrestling so that he can then give the boy the biscuits. Jacob is still thinking, I'll do it. And God has to break him to teach him who's in charge. He is reminding Jacob who runs things round here, who issues blessing. And that's why the breaking is so gracious of God. He wants to bless Jacob as he's promised to do. And he's going to go to great lengths to make sure that happens. God isn't just saying, you see, look, I'll offer a gift to you if you want it. God is having to say, I've got this gift. At the moment, you're not going to receive it, so I'm going to so work in you so that you do receive it. And God does the same thing today. He goes to great lengths to teach us to receive his grace. Think of a friend of ours, a gifted Christian minister. He was set for a life of very fruitful preaching, extremely gifted young man. One summer, he's suddenly paralyzed from the waist down, and he's confined to a wheelchair. He's got a very different life ahead of him, still Christian ministry, but it's a very different life. It's as if God might have said to him, you've got your plans, but the most important thing for you to learn is to trust me and to depend on me. And you and I, in our little ways, we make our plans, we strive for certain things in life to happen because we think that'll give us the life of blessing that we all crave. Maybe it's just the plans for how the week is going to go. Maybe it's just plans for a nice weekend. Maybe it's plans for the health to get better. I had conversations with people, family people, and we talk about, look, when we've got over this issue of health, well, then we'll get back to normal. Ever had those sort of conversations? Perhaps there's a plan for our work, some change that we'll try and incorporate because that'll make a world of difference to everything else. And what happens is God doesn't allow the plans to happen. We don't get better health-wise. In fact, the doctor simply tells us there's something else that's gone wrong. We don't get the job. It's a big surprise. The weekend just does not go as we expect. Because God has judged perhaps that there is something more important, something better for us. He says it is better for you that you learn to trust me. It's better for you that you clock again that you're not in charge of your life, that you must depend on me more. God's breaking is that Jacob might receive what God longs to give him. And we get this curious change of name in this wrestling match. You see verse 27, let's just go back for our last few minutes. The man asks Jacob, what is your name? Jacob, he answered, as if admitting what he's been like. What's your name? Deceiver, grabber. That's how I've been all this time. Verse 28, the man then said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and with men and have overcome. Now, in one sense, this is very curious because I thought we just said Jacob didn't win, he didn't overcome, he didn't prevail. God prevailed. Jacob was the one who was broken. In what sense is it that Jacob has overcome? Well, I suggest in the sense that he was broken. In the sense he won by admitting defeat. That's the way God wants us to receive the gift. He overcame because he didn't strive himself anymore, but begged for God's grace. The way to succeed with God is to admit failure, admit inability. And so much of God's ways through the Bible are that topsy-turvy way. We began, didn't we? Jesus, who in very nature God, took the form of a slave. He did not come to be served as he should have been, but to serve. It was in the defeat of the cross that Jesus brought victory. And that pattern continues in the Christian life. It continues in Christian ministry. In weakness, you know the verse, there is strength. And that, I suggest, is what prepares Jacob actually for the future. In the big picture, he's returning to the land. Before that, there's this head-to-head with Esau that he's been dreading. And God has prepared him with a new name. Israel speaks of struggle with God. He's learnt to admit failure, to admit defeat, to admit that he can't. And if he's survived a face-to-face meeting with God, it's okay. He'll survive the face-to-face meeting with Esau. He's got a new name, and if you like, a new walk. Verse 31. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, the dawn of a new start. It looks hopeful. And he was limping because of his hip. The constant reminder of dependence on God. He's been broken. And Jacob is never going to receive the land until he's limping. And that is the way to walk from now on. It's the same today. Blessing from God, the blessing of heaven, that will not come until we are, so to speak, limping. Not strutting, but limping. Limping is the way anyone starts as a Christian, as you beg for grace and you admit defeat. Limping is the way you go on as a Christian, actually. I remember talks at university, apologetic talks headed, "Is Christianity just a crutch?" Trying to defend, of course, that it's not just sort of psychological comfort blanket. It's certainly not that. But Christ is certainly who we heavily lean upon throughout our lives. In that sense, it most certainly is the crutch we can't live without. And if at times we start running on our own proud legs, striving independently, it may be that the Lord breaks us. Because he longs that we receive his grace, that we lean upon him, that we admit we can't, and we trust him. And that brokenness, that limping, is how we're to face all our fears right until heaven. Not by striving to deal with them in our particular way, but as Jacob did, by clinging to the Lord who is over them. Limping, leaning on him. Let's pause for a minute or two and then we'll sing our last song.